Case Studies by Jorge Rodriguez Marrero from the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico, Ponce campus, Graduate Program in Education, created as a partial requirement for LIDE 8050 research methods for Professor Victor Filiberti Rubert. Our objectives for today is to discuss the definitions of case studies, discuss the characteristics of case studies, discuss the primary uses of case studies. What is a case study? There are many definitions of case studies, but the most encompassing are the following. Cresswell and Poth in 2018 hypothesized that case studies are an in-depth exploration of a bounded system. For example, activities, events, processes, or individuals based on extensive data collection. Stake in 1995 states that they are studies of the particularities and complexities of a single case, coming to understand its activity within important circumstances. Crow et al. In 2011 hypothesized that they are a research approach that is used to generate an in depth, multifaceted understanding of a complex issue in its real life context. And Starman in 2013 states that they are a comprehensive description of an individual case and its analysis. In synthesis, case study is an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomenon in depth and within its real life context, especially when the boundaries between phenomenon and context are not clearly evident, and they can integrate quantitative and qualitative data from a variety of sources. What do case studies do? Any discipline or endeavor may use case studies, but it is particularly suited for education, health, and the social sciences. Researchers may focus on a program, event, or activity involving individuals rather than a group. And the ethnographer searches for the shared patterns that develop as a group interacts over time. A case study is about determining what the investigated case may be. It is not about defining populations and selecting appropriate examples. The characteristics of case studies. When researching a group, it may be more interested in describing the activities of the group than identifying shared patterns of behavior exhibited by the group. Researchers are less likely to identify a cultural theme to examine at the beginning of a study, and they focus on an in-depth exploration of the actual case. Now, to identify the purposes of case studies. The researcher seeks to develop an in-depth understanding of the case by collecting multiple forms of data. While providing this in-depth understanding requires that only a few cases be studied because for each case examined, the researcher has less time to devote to exploring the depth of any one case. Now, the types of case studies, there are three basic types of case studies. There's the exploratory case study, where it is an in-depth research analysis of a situation where researchers use the study to embark on additional research. A descriptive or illustrative case study presents a complete description of an event within its context. And an explanatory case study focuses on establishing cause and effect relationships, explaining which causes produce which effects. Now, there are categories of case studies. There's the singular and the multiple case study. The different classifications are derived from different theoretical positions. Choosing a particular type or kind of case study depends on the research purpose. Firstly, there's the retrospective in the singular case study. And the researcher is looking back on a phenomenon, situation, person, or event and studying it in its historical integrity. Snapshot studies, the case is being examined in one particular period of time, and the analysis is aided by the temporal juxtaposition of events. And diachronic studies, the studies change over time and are similar to longitudinal studies. The case, we have the nested case study that involves the comparison of elements within one case, and these are called nested elements. In parallel case studies, the cases are all happening and being studied simultaneously or at the same time. In a sequential study, the cases happen consecutively, and there is an assumption that what has happened at one point in time or an intervening period will in some way affect the next incident. There are additional classifications of case studies, but suffice it to say, different classifications are derived from different theoretical positions. The procedures for the application of a case study, which the investigator should clearly identify the research field, that is, the class or subclass of events within which a single case or several cases are instances to be studied. And the subject of the study is thus an instance of the same phenomenon. And the phenomenon comprises the analytical frame, that is, the object. Now, some considerations when implementing a case study. In all the literature, there is no consensus for case selection. And we have basically four propositions. The first one, the researcher selects a case for research. An individual, a family, or other group, organization, or community where a practical problem that the researchers are interested in exists. A second position examines several individual cases that are selected in such a way that their analysis provides the most diverse information that we are able to collect. A third position, the researcher selects interesting cases, such as contrasting, extreme, exceptional cases, instead of typical or average cases. And a fourth position, the researcher selects a representative or typical case because new hypotheses and deeper layers that previous theory has missed may be found. There are several advantages and disadvantages in using case studies. As an advantage, they have a potential to achieve high conceptual validity. And this refers to the identification and measurement of the indicators that best present the theoretical concepts that a researcher wants to measure. They have a strong procedure for fostering new hypotheses, and they're very suitable for serving the heuristic purpose of inductively identifying additional variables and new hypotheses. Their usefulness for closely examining the hypothesized role of causal mechanisms, that is, variables. In the context of individual cases, they look at a large number of intervening variables and observe any unexpected aspect of the operation of a particular variable, or help identify what conditions are present in a case that activates the variables. And fourthly, their connectivity to everyday life, because they are studied in a real life context. As a disadvantage, case studies value general theoretical knowledge rather than practical knowledge. It's impossible to generalize on the basis of an individual case, and therefore the case study cannot contribute to scientific development in general. And the case study is most useful for generating hypotheses. That is the first stage of a total research process, whereas other methods are more suitable for hypothesis testing and theory building. Case studies contain a bias towards verification, that is, a tendency to confirm the researcher's preconceived notion. And it is often difficult to summarize and develop general propositions and theories on the basis of specific cases. Researchers need a wide array of skills in order to perform a case study. They have to have a familiarity with the research methods, methodologies, and philosophical orientations used, whether realist or positivist. In addition to empirical skills, such as those used for hypothesis testing, researchers must take into account any side effects which may cause a shift in the case study. Researchers must also be cognizant of the occupational field of discipline and legal issues involved in the case study process. Researchers need to have the ability to come to applicable conclusions utilizing synthesis skills. Researchers also must take into account ethical norms of confidentiality, objectivity, and fairness while seeking to improve the practices and processes of the object of the case study. And finally, it is necessary to have the ability to be able to cope with ideological differences and their repercussions. That is, a case study does not always prove the researcher's hypothesis true or. Now, for an example case study from Thompson 2010, the italicized portion indicates the purpose of the case study, while the methods and procedures are in bold. In this case, the purpose of this multiple case study was to understand more about caring teachers who work with at-risk students in secondary schools, located in a Midwestern city, and thereby to add complexity to literature. Two middle school teachers and two high school teachers were recruited to participate. They were observed on multiple occasions and interviewed twice. The data from these observations and interviews were initially analyzed case by case. The cross-case analysis based on the results from the individual cases resulted in 6 themes that were present across the 4 cases. The following themes were identified: the role of relationships, perspective on at-risk students, providing opportunities for students to develop a positive sense of themselves, the value of a positive classroom experience for both students and teacher, negotiating power and flexibility. There is no one way to implement a case study, but advanced qualitative research proposes this flowchart. In this flowchart, they have 3 phases: the define and design stage, the prepare, collect, and analyze stage, and the analyze and conclude stage. In the define and design stage, the researcher develops the theory, selects the cases, and designs the data collection protocol. In the prepare, collect, and analyze phase, the researcher conducts the case studies and writes the individual case reports. In the analyze and conclude phase, the researcher draws cross-case conclusions, modifies theories, develops policy implications, and writes the cross-case report. Conclusion. There is no one way to do a case study. There are multiple formats of writing or creating case studies. Choosing a particular type or kind of case study depends on the research purpose. Case studies may be used for quantitative, qualitative, or mixed research methods. And finally, the researcher must be mindful of researcher bias. But this can be mitigated through proper implementation of research methods.